So thank you for everyone attending the talk. This was originally going to be a beer farmers talk, but they all had jobs or something, so unfortunately couldn't make it. So I will be standing in instead of them. So just a quick bit about myself. I do stuff at a company, security stuff, co-leader of our Scotland chapter, beer farmers member. So in a way, you are listening to a beer farmers talk, just not the one that we were planning. I'm really active on Twitter, and I just do security stuff. So the purpose of this talk is to go over. I'm not aware of anything else being called this, but I came up with the idea of security enablement after being frustrated like that guy. Finding that going off to teams, asking them to fix the same things over and over, getting a bit of friction, asking for bugs to be fixed, not getting security reviews done, so on and so forth. And it became apparent to me that we have to change things. Constantly trying to do the shouting, scolding, and that is just not working. So try to do a more encouraging, positive way of doing it. So the concept itself, security enablement, I kind of derived from the squad type model. Anyone here familiar with squad type? Okay, so squad is a development type concept where teams are broken up into isolated teams that are self-functioning. So they'll do things from development on the systems that they own, testing, deployments, troubleshooting. So you no longer have separate teams for development, testing. It's a team responsible for service. So the idea behind that, they own that system, they can hopefully get things out quicker. This obviously means you get some degrees of isolation. You might have different systems that share common components. So you kind of form squads to join up and form things termed as tribes and guilds. They kind of work together to perform a single task. Spotify has a really good resource on this. So if you're interested, recommend go reading up on there. But the big thing around squads is having the cross-team collaboration to achieve the goal. So my idea is take that sort of concept and apply the security aspect to it. While going down this road, I think it's important that we have a look at ourselves and see how we are perceived to others, because perception often indicates how teams are going to interact with you, how they're going to react to what you say to them, and when taking a step back and seeing what other, say for instance, our teams think of my team, well, some of that's online there. So these are just pictures I found online. And security engineers. So I'm a security engineer. My partner does think I sit on my backside all day staring at a monitor doing nothing. And yes, I actually normally do shots at the computer. But as I said, it's important to see what teams think of you. And if you take a step back and see what we actually do, especially what I used to do in my team, was scold a lot, tell people what to do, what not to do, as well as seen as a roadblock. No, you can't release this because has it had a security scan? Have you done this? Have you done that? So it's a hindrance to them delivering what they're actually trying to get out into production. So, taking a step back, I think it's time that we change from being the perception of the policing, the ones that are constantly watching over teams, trying to find faults with them, trying to prevent them from doing things, basically at times prevent them from doing their jobs. And change it into a concept of where we teach teams. Let's teach them how to do things. Let's teach them how to do the basic things so we don't have to keep up with doing the constant trivial things. Let's get better interaction with the teams so then when things do go wrong, they can hopefully come to us and not be afraid. And this is really important, because if you take a step back and see where development used to lie, or in fact most processes in companies, it was very monolithic. I like to think of this as an analogy to development. When you do back in the day, feature release, you had lots of changes all grouped together and put out in one big change. Quarterly release, annual release, bi-monthly release. And that was great. That was a lot easier from a security point of view. You could, when the release was happening, sure, it would take a while to do the security test and review, but you could plan for it. You could allocate resources to it. You knew it was coming. Whereas if you change to today, releases are something like this. They come in all shapes and sizes. And it's now just a constant flow. There's no notion of, hey, we're going to do a quarterly release. Many companies that are, especially the newer ones that are following modern development methodologies, are following the CI/CD. So for those who don't know, CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous delivery. Basically, develop, test, passes the test, push into production. And that means you end up with the releases happening on a continual basis, sometimes maybe even a daily basis. So that means you can no longer plan, allocate resources, because it's something that's just continuously happening. So that's definitely not going to scale well, because as we all know, security teams don't scale up as the business grows. And we're already under-resourced as is. So this is where this whole concept comes from. And before going down this path, the very first thing you need to do is make sure you get buy-in from management. This is going to help to make sure that you get the support that you need from the top level, that you're going to get the perception that this is something really important. Think about it. If the CEO is talking about security, it must be really important, versus some engineering manager down at the lower rung. Not to say that what they're saying is not important, but just the perception coming from the further up the chain is better. And also, if you're going to start implementing features, asking for budgets, so on and so forth, you're going to have a much better time if you get the buy-in from those who actually make those kind of decisions. And while doing this, make sure you're on the same page. So make sure the management understands what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, and at the same time that you work with management to understand that you're going to help support the business. Because the last thing management want to do is have some sort of feature or process that's going to hinder business and negatively impact on the business. So once you've got buy-in from management, then you can kind of start on the path. And the very first thing I'd say is awareness. Sorry. For me, awareness is really something important. When I did my university degree, I started off as a developer. I did 4 years of university. Not once did I hear SQL injection, cross-site scripting, any of the common vulnerabilities. I went straight into a job. Now, is it fair to assume that I should have been able to code and prevent cross-site scripting or SQL injection? How could I prevent it if I didn't even know about it? So we have to create awareness around these issues. It's not saying that then people will fix them, but at least they know it exists. They have to be aware of it. And hopefully, by making them aware of it, and this is where I always prefer using real-world examples. So, for example, the cross-site scripting, don't just show an alert box. Show something like a beef hook. The cross-site scripting, inject a beef hook, user's browser's compromised. That suddenly brings the awareness to the user that cross-site scripting is actually something that's really dangerous and you need to be aware of. Alert box, nothing really. And taking that a step further and saying, here's some real-world examples where it's actually resulted in an issue or compromise for a company, just further drives that message home. And then there's some common tools that you can use to help. So OWASP Top 10, I think everyone or most people in the room will know what that is. And it's used in many tools, reports, and it's something that's updated quite regularly, not too often, but every few years. And to me, that's a really useful tool because it keeps up to date with the current common vulnerabilities that you can find out there. So again, emphasizing these are the issues you need to watch out for to those developing your systems, testing your systems, deploying your systems. SANS 25 has something similar, and then CWE is going a little bit lower, but it helps you classify different vulnerabilities based on their types. So while going down this, another really useful tool for awareness is CTFs. It adds some sort of fun gamification to awareness. And also helps from your security team. So I'm horrible at CTFs, I won't lie. But I did my first one last year, and I've always been a bit too afraid of doing them because I suspect I was horrible at them, and I confirmed that. But what it does, the one thing that it taught me is you get so fixated in your own little bubble that you work day in, day out. Doing CTFs make you aware of a lot wider issues to look out for. So I'm pretty much focused on web apps. I don't do anything much around network security and that. CTFs change that. So it's just making you aware of the different scopes and getting other people involved in that. Just going to help from that aspect. And then also having simple CTFs. So again, from awareness point of view, having some competition, and I think most people would agree, development teams, QA teams, basically IT folk are competitive when they get in a team environment. So putting a team against a key team in some fun, maybe even an informal CTF competition is a great way to raise awareness and have some fun while doing it. Brown bags are another great one because they can literally cost nothing. Just set up a few PowerPoint slides, present it over some lunch time session, especially if you've got some desktop sharing. There are webcast tools out there, and it's a great way of sharing information with your teams. While talking about training, the important thing is don't make it mandatory. I find that as soon as you make it mandatory, it becomes a checkbox exercise. And you've got to remember teams have their own priorities, they're under pressure to deliver. So what they're going to do, I've got to finish this, I'll leave it to the last minute, I've got to finish it by this date, click, 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 click. They've not absorbed anything, and you've actually solved nothing. Rather make it easy for them to access it when they want to, and make it relevant. Why should a web developer take some mandatory training around, I don't know, say, for instance, OS Intel, if they're just developing on web applications? Is it going to help them? So make it relevant, and also make it self-reference so they can come back to it. Hey, how do I prevent cross-site scripting? Okay, well, I'll just go to this page and look it up. And make it simple to digest. So I'm a really big fan of tables. So for example, security headers. Have a table. These are your mandatory security headers, which you should always have. These are the defaults. And then if they want to have more information, links that they can drill down and get further information. As a dev, I can see straight away, go to that page. Okay, there's these tables, copy them, put them in. It's taken me 5 minutes versus trawling through realms of documentation. So as I mentioned before, security teams are often facing challenges with resourcing. So one way to combat that is with security champions. Security champions will be people that you should have volunteer. the last thing you want to do is try to force this on someone, because they'll likely be resistant to it. Get people to volunteer to this because A, they'll be interested in security, otherwise why they're volunteering, and B, they'll actually want to make a change. So that's really important. And they're going to help, because they're going to act as the middleman between the security team and the development teams and QA teams and deployment teams. So take, for example, a team working on some company portal and the security team. There's going to be a disconnect there. The security team is going to be focused on purely security-related concepts. That development team is going to be focused on the web app side of things. There may be new technologies that the security team's not even aware of, or there may be issues that the dev team's not even aware of. Having that middleman, they'll kind of bridge that gap a bit. And they'll also be more aware of what kind of priorities lie in that development team's pipeline, so what needs to come, what new features are being developed, and they can help plan as well as say, hey, this should get a security review or a manual pen test or whatever. So you get better visibility into what the teams are doing as well. And as I said, security teams are under-resourced, so it helps reduce the burden. These security champions can take on some of the more trivial type security things. So if you have a scanner, maybe they can take ownership of scanning their web app. Means that now that dev team can scan their web app when they want to, and it reduces the burden on your team having to do that. And as I said, it will help identify issues sooner. So, the whole shift left. Well, having that at the source means that they can potentially, won't be always, but they can potentially help identify issues sooner. And one way to try to get people actively encouraged is some of the points on here. So it's going to look good in their CV. Security is not going away. Security is only growing in problems. So anything that you can include in the CV based on security is a plus. You can still attending conferences, maybe, depending on the company and budgets. And they're going to possibly fix and find things sooner. So from that team point of view, it means less issues to fix, less possible blockage for releases. So it's a win-win for both teams. So on top of security champions, you have the tools. Now, tools are going to be really important. As I mentioned before, things are going to happen a lot faster, and one way to do that is reduce the burden on yourselves, the manual work that you have to do, especially for the more trivial things. So static analysis, tools that will scan the source code. There's many options out there. I'm not going to mention names, but feel free to ask me afterwards or look online. But those are going to look at the actual source code itself and find common vulnerabilities in the source code. So that could be things like hard-coded passwords, weak encryption algorithms, or even following the kind of logic of the source code at some points. So, for example, a method or function that takes in a parameter and it sees it's not escaping that request, the parameters of the request. The next tool on there is dynamic analysis tools. So these I kind of think of your more pen testing type tools, automated pen testing in a sense. So these are going to be typically your web apps scanners that are going to attempt to do common probes against your system. So testing things for, like, example, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, finding information about the web app. So what Cypher suites the web app supports. Are any of those weak? Again, things like this will take you hours to do. These tools will literally take you minutes. Some of them will take hours, but some of them will just take minutes. The next one is a really big one, in my opinion. And we're starting to see a rise of this is libraries and dependency management, especially around injecting potential malicious code into those libraries. It has happened. And the way I look at it, if I'm an attacker, why should I go through the hard work of trying to break through the front door, the back door, when I can get through out via the front door with a library? As well as libraries are horrendous in terms of maintaining. I've done it, dependency hell. This library depends on this library, that depends on that library. They didn't update the library, it has a vulnerability, it doesn't get updated. So from a managing point of view, you need to know what risk you have when you have libraries. So there are tools out there that do a great job. OWASP Dependency Track is probably the only tool I'm going to mention because it's free. It does a fantastic job. It'll tell you what libraries are you using and which of those actually have known vulnerabilities. And if you don't believe me, ask Equifax how this impacted them. Kind of related to the next one. So asset and vulnerability scanning. Again, asset management is something that I don't think a single company does really well. Time and time again, we've seen open MongoDBs, open Elasticsearch databases, and that's because you have poor asset management with poor scanning around those assets and detecting them, as well as the vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities in terms of more like OS level packages, software, that kind of thing. So quickly going over tools, when you're selecting a tool, ask around, ask the community. You don't have to do double the work. If someone's already gone through the process of trying to vet tools, get the input. They might also find issues that they find with some tool that you're looking at that might not work for you or whatever. And also a big one, open source. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of open source, but there's often a misconception open source is always free. Yes, the product might be free, but you might invest a significant portion and resources in trying to maintain it, keep it up to date. Like, for example, Apache, the WAF for Apache. I forgot what it's called. But trying to maintain that yourself is difficult. You're going to have a lot of time and resources in maintaining that. Not security. Thank you. There are companies out there which you can give a monthly fee and get their product, and they maintain it for you. Whether that will be beneficial for you, I don't know, but that's one thing that you need to consider. And as we grow more and more in terms of delivering faster and faster, automation is going to be key. Devices are exploding. The number of systems that we have are exploding. We now have things like elastic systems where VMs spin up and spin down. Trying to keep track of that in a manual process is not going to work. So you're going to need some more automation into that. And where you can, embed it in the SDLC process. CI/CD is kind of enforces this. So it's going to be a click of a button. Well, when I click the button, how do I make sure what's going out is going to be secure? I can't expect every time I click the button someone to validate that. You're going to need some process to do that. And in my opinion, this is the biggest one for security. Automate at least the more trivial things as much as possible. Quick one, security issues. Make sure you have a process for triaging security issues as well as prioritizing them. Some companies I've seen have no process. And by this, I mean you need to separate your typical bugs from your actual from your security bugs. They can use the same tool, but make sure you have a process of being able to identify the risk that each security bug poses and be able to triage that. It's also going to help in terms of tracking which teams might need help. So, hey, this team has created 10 blocker bugs in the last month, whereas no other team has. Well, that team's obviously a problem. Not to point fingers, but to identify, well, does that team need extra training, guidance? Is there something else missing? So it kind of touched on the choice of tools. Look to others. I encourage using things like Twitter. I started Twitter about 2 years ago. In that time, I've learned A huge amount. More than I've learned in probably all my years in security outside of Twitter. And you network with people. You can bounce ideas off people. You can get advice, support. All of that's really important. And also, as it's up there, it also avoids you repeating some of the same mistakes that were made before. Avoid duplicate efforts. They might have resources that they can share with you, open source documentation, or might even know some tools that might help, that you might, will develop it from the ground up. And the other important one is avoid the same mistakes. So in security, you always want to try to avoid mistakes, because that's normally security issues. So if you can avoid those, great. And then some other just quick advice. Accept failures. We're all human. Accept that you're not going to solve every security bug or get every security bug. Personally, I find this really hard. I'm a perfectionist. I see a security bug I want to resolve now. But I need to realize that we're not going to solve them all, so that's why you prioritize. Make sure you fix the ones that are going to represent the most risk. And at the end of the day, security is about managing risk. You're not going to eliminate it. You just try to reduce it as much as possible. And that kind of leads on to the be patient part. So sometimes you might not get a bug fixed as soon as you want. Work with the team, try to get it fixed as soon as possible, but be patient. Help them. As I said, ask for help and engage with the community. So, to sum up, at the end of the day, when we work for our companies, we're all trying to achieve the same goal as a development team, a QA team, finance team, HR team, doesn't matter what team. We work there to help the company sell services or products to make a profit, or provide services if you're a non-profit organization, or help. But the point is, you're all trying to work to achieve the same thing at the end of the day. And that makes you all part of the same team. So you should work together. And there are ways to change the perception that security is a roadblock, something of a hindrance, and it can actually help. I've done some things in the past that actually improved the process, the way people went about things. And that helped security as well as the process, and that's a huge win. Because you're going to get people more engaged, and that slowly changes their perception. And at the end of the day, also one way to get people to help with security or engage with security more is make it least effort as possible. Requires little knowledge as possible. Provide the knowledge, but also least effort. So if something can require one line as opposed to them spending hours on the internet, great, that's going to be a huge win. So, for example, I've developed a TLS library for developers to use for our systems. They don't have to have any knowledge of which software suites are weak and why, or even which ones to support. They do a one line in their code, and they know they're great. It's going to be really hard for them to argue against it. It's going to be easy for them to implement, and everyone wins. And that kind of builds on strive for a security culture, where teams start thinking of security as being their problem as well, getting them and their peers to call out those who aren't doing security as opposed to you, and that drives that security culture. So, questions? Yeah.
Adding on to that, and what about engaging in security disclosure? Yeah. As you would do.
So you certainly have a disclosure program. Some means of allowing people to disclose a vulnerability or finding to you, and then make it transparent. So work with your dev teams, give regular updates to that person who found it, and give it. I know a lot of people expecting money and gifts and that, but a simple thank you.
What would you say to a CISO to actually engage in security in that sense? So to engage in development. If if they're kind of partitioned in that sense, where the CISO is not directly involved in the development.
So at the end of the day, CISO is going to be responsible for the security. It's in their best interest that security is improved where possible. So trying to get their buy-in from that is going to help them in the long run.
That's a development, for example.
Right. So by getting the CISO on board, getting the CISO to work with the engineering or development manager or head, form kind of these plans, that will help hopefully drive it. So, yep, at the back. So, it's a good question. There is ASVS. It's not quite a security development thing. It's just more, it's more a testing framework, but you could kind of leverage that to help aid in security development. I'm not aware of anything outside of the Microsoft. The other problem is things are changing so fast, so what might be there one day can change 3-4 years down the line. So it's difficult. And every company changes their perception slightly. So go speak to a company, hey, what's agile to you? You might get 2 different answers from different companies. Any other questions?
How would you kind of evolve if a company does not want to go towards modern kind of way of thinking, and they want to kind of stay in the past, which is what a lot of companies do still do?
So there are times where companies cannot change because of legacy reasons and whatever, but certainly they could probably try to adapt to more modern methodologies and concepts. Try to take use case, like comes to the point where I was saying take real world examples. That's always a great way to try to solve something, because it's not, hey, this could happen or this may happen. Here's an example. This is where they gained extra money because they were twice as productive or something like that.
Follow on. So say a company has a Windows 2003 production mode, and it's in production, it's a financial system. How would you engage with that company if they just, for whatever reason, not upgrade that? Say, obviously exploitable, but how would you engage with that company to say, well,
okay,
big issue there?
I will talk to you afterwards because again the wrap up. But thank you everyone.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you.